Okay, cool. Off we go. So, very warm welcome to everybody. My name is John Wilks from eHealth Learning, and we're welcoming Emma Pritchard, who's talking to us from Dorset, near Dorchester, and Joe Sellers, who's going to be hosting today as well. So over to you, Joe. Thank you.
Yes, hi everybody. Hope there's plenty of you out there to listen to us this evening. And yes, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Emma Pritchard, a colleague of mine who's a very eclectic grief counsellor who practices in Dorset. So over to you, Emma. Please tell us what we need to hear from you, and that is, how do we deal with bereavement with particular relevance to the days we're living in at present?
Okay, hi Josephine and John and everyone that might be listening. Can I firstly say thank you so much for inviting me this evening. It's such a privilege to be able to share perhaps some of my experience with people. I'm very lucky to have had some amazing training through tutors and supervisors and for the bereavement charities I've worked for. So I really hope I can bring that wisdom with me tonight as a comfort for others. So I've worked in bereavement for about 7 years. I started working for Cruise Bereavements, first of all, and now I work for a charity called Mosaic, who are a charity that supports bereaved families in Dorset, an amazing charity. I think for what I'd quite like to do, first of all, if that's okay with both of you, is maybe just talk about how death is quite an uncomfortable subject, how it's often an elephant in the room. It's at the moment very difficult for us to not be aware of death because of the coronavirus pandemic, the news reports that are coming through, our friends and family that may be poorly and who may have already have sadly died from the coronavirus. As well as that, just talking about all the different feelings, the physical sensations and the behaviours that might come with grief. When you asked me to talk to you, Josephine, I wrote down just some of the feelings off the top of my head that my clients have shared with me and I've experienced myself. And I think there's about 25 that I wrote down off the top of my head. So thinking about those feelings, very overwhelming for people. So if I just run through a few of them, it may help. We can often feel very shocked and in denial, a feeling of disbelief. We may feel very sad, which might cause us to cry, which we may find really difficult because, especially in families, parents may not like to show their feelings to the children in the families. So this overwhelming crying, angry, feeling very angry, and that might be with yourself. It might be projected at doctors. You might feel they haven't done enough for your loved ones. You also may feel incredibly angry with the person who's died. Like, how dare you die? You know, I don't want you to die. There may be a lot of guilt attached to deaths, especially when it's very sudden deaths. We haven't said what we wanted to say. We may have had an argument with the person before they died. Feeling very anxious is very normal. And just, I mean, all these feelings, and I haven't said all of them, can make us feel like we're going a little bit crazy, actually. And just to say that that is normal, and it may not feel okay, but they are normal feelings. If we just move on to maybe some of the physical sensations we may feel, often people say they feel very tight in their chest with all these feelings. So learning how to manage those and breathe through them. Children and adults will say they have tummy aches and headaches when they experience grief. They may not be sleeping very well, your appetites may change, you may withdraw for life. So actually life changes hugely when you experience grief. I mean, I think for me, when I'm with my clients, I do use some of the grief theories to help them to feel comforted by that as well. And one of them that I really like, I don't know whether you can see this, but it's the Louis Tonkin grief model, and I call it the fried egg effect. So there's a sort of a yellow, the yolk in the middle. And I like to say to people that very often is your grief. So your grief is the fried egg, the yolk of the egg, all those feelings I talked about, maybe 25 or so feelings. And what we learn to do, which is the difficult part actually, it takes a lot of courage, is to start to build our life in the white of the fried egg. And the sort of thing I would normally say to people is, you know, go and join support networks, don't be on your own, don't withdraw, you know, if you, you know, you go to school and all those things, but you will go back into the grief of the rawness of that grief at birthdays and anniversaries and Christmas times. And it's very, very normal. But I think at the moment, I've been thinking about people who may be recently bereaved and how tough it must be at the moment when they're having to self-isolate. And actually, what can I maybe say to them tonight to comfort them with in their grief process when they've been sort of forced to be on their own.
Emma, I've recently lost a very good, well, probably one of my, you know, my best friend actually, and there was a few things that I noticed about people's reaction to being with when he was dying, and one of those was, I suppose, avoidance, probably, that people would want to talk about anything else but what was actually happening in the room almost. Mm. And also there was a kind of sense, which I think a lot of people feel, is like, well, what's the best way to support someone who's grieving? Because again, I think a lot of people feel awkward, don't they? How, you know, someone's lost their long-term partner or husband or whatever it is, and they don't really know what to say. And
so very often people will cross the road and things. I think it's a really first of all, really sorry to hear about your best friend. So thank you for sharing that, because that is tough. What I would say to people is to ask them actually what they need. If you're really struggling to know what to say to somebody in their grief, then just say, what is it that you need? And actually they may not know, and they may just say, I don't know, but at least you sort of asked them and just checking in with them. I think at the moment, to make connections with people who you know are in grief or have been recently bereaved, whether that's virtually or with a telephone support. But I think a lot of people, what you're saying, John, that's a really normal response. People just don't know what to say. And I think when you go back to sort of the 1900s, people were very used to people dying, and there was a process to it. People wore blacks, and then after about a year, I think people then wore purple. So people still knew that you were sort of recently grieving. And I think, you know, over time, life has changed.
Yeah. And when it comes to, because I know you work a lot with children, don't you, through Mosaic, is that right?
Yes, I do, yeah.
So, I mean, presumably then that comes up particularly with parents who've got to, I don't know, break news to their children that their grannies died or their aunts died or something like that, and how to handle that. Because I think, again, a lot of parents find that very difficult, don't they? What kind of language they would use. I suppose it depends on the age of the child, but, you know.
I think it is, from all my experience of working with children and families and all the training that we do with Mosaic, it's about actually being as honest with the child as age appropriately possible. Children are amazing. They normally sense things that are happening in the home anyway, and their anxieties can sometimes be about those whispered conversations. So in my experience, it's just much better if you can be honest with the child and share as soon as you can. I mean, we do a lot of continuing bonds work with children, working with the healthy adjustments to continuing bonds to remember our loved ones, creating memory jars and looking at photographs with children. And most children will say, thank you so much for giving me that time to talk about my daddy who died. They just want some time and space to be able to remember their loved ones. But it is a very difficult conversation for families. And I think that's where charities like Mosaic and Child Bereavement UK and Winston's Wish can really support families if they're struggling. I think it's okay to not know what to say. That's okay.
Yeah. I mean, how do you find it when say parents have a particular kind of religious belief, you know, quite a strong religious belief, which perhaps then they assume that the child will adopt a similar kind of belief and you know, what, say for example, what happens after death? You know, I mean, a lot of people might believe that we, you know, we go on a journey, we maybe meet the loved ones who've departed, or all those kind of belief systems, and then they might expect the child to believe the same kind of thing. I'm just wondering how you deal with different kind of belief systems. Every religion's got very, very different belief systems around death, haven't they?
Yeah, they have, and that's part of our job. You know, as soon as I'm meeting with a client, I will ask them what are your spiritual beliefs, and I will spend time with them really trying to understand it, because it's important that I do. I know, like in the Philippines, they do a lovely gifting ceremony, and there's different, you know, like you're saying, it's just learning. And I might do a little bit of extra research, but with the child, exactly, I would probably say, what do you believe? And whether it's the same as the parent or not, it's always about the child and the child's voice, and allowing them to kind of create create their memory and their belief. It's a journey we go on, really. And I say to anyone I work with is, the grief journey is a very unique journey. And it's their journey, and I just go in for part of it, and I can't fix anything, but what I can do is help, just walk alongside them for that part. So it's a bit like putting a jigsaw puzzle together sometimes, working with children, to try and work out what their beliefs are, what their feelings are, what they know about the story about their loved one's death. So yeah.
I mean, and how do you, as a counsellor, because I mean, and now, for example, psychotherapists have to have supervision and support, and I mean, like, because some of their stories must touch you a lot, and you must get affected by things, particularly when children are involved. How do you deal with all that? I mean, do you have backup yourself, or how do you? Yeah.
How do I? Okay, so I always feel just so privileged to be doing this role, because it's never just working with the client, it's also working with their special people who have died. So I think I said to Josephine the other day on the telephone, you know, if I'm working with a wife and her husband's died, I'm getting to know the husband as well. So yes, these stories are really touching, and I feel that to be the best sort of counsellor I can be, I allow myself to attach to all that vulnerability. So I'm only as good as the vulnerability that I'm with of the client. So yes, I do a lot of self-care. I have amazing supervision, amazing work colleagues who are also bereavement counsellors, and we meet once a month or twice a month sometimes. I have supervision, and I look after myself in a self-care way. You know, I go for lovely walks and stay grounded in that way.
Yeah.
Emma, sorry, I've just wondered if Emma wanted to mention any more about the grief theories she works with. You obviously move around, Emma, eclectically within the theories of grief. Have you any specifically particular ones that you find more easy to work with or feel right for you?
Well, I always use the Louis Tonkin model, which I call it the Friday, you know, to explain to normalize grief.
Yes.
But I think also the Strobe and Schutt model, which is about oscillating in and out of grief, and that's normal too. It's okay. We say to a lot of our children that we see, they come on residential camps and things, that it's okay to laugh after somebody's died. It's okay to still be happy. And I think sometimes people need permission after their loved ones have died to go out with their friends or go to the movies. But that's really important part of us reorganizing our worlds, because when someone dies, our whole world just becomes disorganized. And Colin Murray Parkes talks about that, you know, the process of the shock and the denial, and then how we start to reorganize our lives after this disorganized time.
I suppose one of the things I really would like to ask tonight is about people are losing. I know usually we can be with our dying person across the world. People can't even hold their funerals at the moment. What can you say tonight for people who are losing, or they're watching other people losing their beloved ones and they're not with them? So that's suffering, that's bereavement. on another level, isn't it? They've not been able to say goodbye. What sort of how would you talk to someone like that tonight, Emma?
I imagine, and I'm thinking that these people who are unable to say to their loved ones, knowing that they've died in hospital, will be feeling incredibly anxious about that death of their loved one. I think we have to, at this point, take some strength of, that the doctors and the nurses, they know how to be with somebody when we have to take that with us, their hope that the love that they've been cared for and they haven't been alone. But obviously there'll be huge anxiety for people, and I would say to people, please do not sit with that grief on your own. It's going to be complicated, it's going to be painful. Please reach out for support to the bereavement charities, helplines, speak to friends, because this is going to be a difficult time for you. And I really send you my best wishes with that, but please don't deal with it on your own.
Because this is a form of complicated grief, isn't it? We're moving.
Yeah.
And that needs very careful handling, and not to stay alone with it is the most important thing. Yeah.
And I would say to other people who are concerned about that, we're all experiencing so much loss generally at the moment, being separated from our loved ones, grandparents, everybody's living in their world at the moment, very disconnected from their loved ones, is to, if you're feeling anxious about becoming ill and ending up in hospital, then please write your loved ones letters, tell them you love them, send them, make some music for them, whatever it might be. And it can be just part of the separation process that we're going through. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that you're not going to ever see them again, but what it can just mean is it's just continuing these bonds, which is a lot of the work that we do when somebody has died, and children especially get a lot of comfort from that. If you're creative, make a tapestry for somebody who you love dearly, and as you're making it, be thinking of them. And that's one thing that it's not advice, but it's more of a comfort, I think, for people. Tell the people that you love, tell them you love them.
Yes, I think, yes, like we are bereaved at the moment. We're separated from our families. But thanks to social media and the wonderful things about technology, we can keep in touch. And I think that's the most important thing, and that we can be as real as possible. I see quite a lot of almost avoidance and trying to be overly happy. And I think we need to just be real. And maybe
I think that's very difficult for people though, Josephine, and we talk about that a lot in my work, about the masks that we wear. Our grief can be so heavy. I said to you, you might be carrying 25 feelings in your body, but we then put a mask on, and actually that's so exhausting. So I think if you can just allow yourself to feel the feelings in the safety of your home.
Yes.
And with loved ones or professionals, if you feel you need the professionals.
With trusted people.
With trusted people.
With trusted people to share, yes. Okay. And where were you going to take us next? Or perhaps John's got something to ask.
I'm just wondering what sort of, on a kind of practical level, Emma, what sort of, where can people go to get support? I know there are things like Cruise and Mosaic you've talked about.
Yeah, well, Cruise have an amazing website at the moment, and it's specifically got a great page for people who are recently bereaved and are in isolation. Don't forget, these people are going to be, in the homes of loved ones that may have just recently died, and, they can't get out of the house much. So I would recommend doing things like opening windows, if finding a routine for you, be in control of everything, because your life will feel very out of control. So anything you can control, do that. But as well as Mosaic, most counsellors are working virtually, but Mosaic have, the office numbers there. All the counsellors are working virtually. Winston's Wish and Child Bereavement UK and the NHS have a really good helpline for mental health, depression, anxiety that may be triggered by bereavement. So,
yeah, and a friend of mine who recently lost her partner also was talking to a counsellor recently, and one of the things that she suggested most of all was getting out into nature and exercising. And how do you feel about that kind of thing, about, well, particularly around exercise, doing something quite physical, I guess?
Well, a couple of years ago, I actually started outdoor therapy groups for my bereaved clients, because grief can be very sticky. And we maybe go back to that in a minute about how it embodies, so it sticks in the body, and how moving around is a really good way of releasing those feelings. So I think that if you are able to go out for a walk every day and make that part of your routine, adding some mindfulness to it. If you've never done mindfulness before, then this may be a really good time to gift yourself with that, learning how to be mindful. For anybody who is going through grief or trauma, very often our bodies and our minds and our spirits become very separated. And one way to reconnect all those three together is through our senses. So when you're outside, listening to the birds, listening to the environment. If you can't get outside, then just listen to your environment inside, smelling all the beautiful spring smells at the moment. So to be mindful in nature, I would advise that as a good way of balancing out that really tough grief. But also you can be mindful all the time. So you can do it when you're making a cup of tea. And by mindful, I mean just focusing on actually putting the water in the kettle, switching on the plug, getting the mug out, and not thinking about all these kinds of chattery thoughts that may be going on and all these worries. So just mindful living, climbing up the stairs to clean your teeth, doing everything in a mindful way. But if you can do it in nature, all the better.
Lovely, yeah. You said something interesting then about how grief kind of, well, how we feel it in the body, so how it manifests in the body. I guess that might be through, obviously, physical sensations, like in the heart, but and then I guess possibly suppressed grief can come out later in other kind of ways. But you said something about sticky. Like sticky,
yeah. I call it, it's kind of very messy and sticky grief. It's sort of, it's layered. So we talked about all those feelings, and if you imagine them all layered on top of each other, you might be feeling sad, but until you felt the sadness, you can't release the anger, and it's like this kind of layered effect. And so I call it very sticky. And when you can move a bit, that can help with releasing that energy. But I also do a lot of storyboard work with people to help them to look at that trauma in a really kind of manageable way, because obviously people need to feel safe to talk about the end of somebody's, their loved one's lives. And there can be a lot of trauma left with that ending. Actually, did you say goodbye? Have I said goodbye? How did the loved one look? Were they in pain? It's a very difficult time for people who are left behind. And a lot of the work I will do with people is just allowing them to tell their story. And it's such a privilege to hear. But obviously when they're ready, because that can be a very difficult time. And the more they can talk about their story, the amygdala part of the trauma, which is in our brain, which puts us in threat and feels very anxious, will start calming down as we process it through our frontal cortex and file it away in a safe place, but only when we feel ready to do that. And I think people can be in grief for years. It doesn't just go away. Sometimes clients will say, well, people say that I should be over this by now, 6 months on, and that isn't the case. Grief, it evolves with us, it grows with us, and it changes with us, but it never goes. And I think one of the amazing learnings I had when I did my cruise training was that we had to go back through all our own bereavements, and we had to really process them all. And people were processing grief, 30 years later. And that's the reality of it. It's to embrace it really and accept it and let it evolve with you. But it does take a lot of courage to do that as well.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people might feel, maybe particularly at this time, around that they could have done more for a loved one or something. Like for example, if someone, you know, maybe, for example, with the virus thing, maybe they caught it because they went, you know, out somewhere when, I don't know, there could be all kinds of dynamics around that, can't there, that someone might feel responsible somehow, or they might feel guilty that they could have done more. I'm just wondering how you kind of deal with that with someone, because that can be quite, you know, can kind of get to people, can't it? It can be quite a kind of gnawing kind of thing that, oh my God, if I'd only done more, he would still be here or she would still be here.
And I want to add a little bit more to that too before Emma answers it, because I find that, you know, I just want to bring into the equation here that if we're animal lovers and we've had lots of animals like horses and dogs and cats, bereavement for them can be horrific afterwards. And every time we lose somebody else or we lose an animal, it does all seem to come up all at the same time. So, you know, I'd like to ask you, obviously that is quite a normal process, I would assume. I think I always think, could I have done more here? Could I have done more for that one? And there are times when you sit back and you start to review them all, and we start, I think there can be a part of you, and I would own this, that I think, where have I failed?
Yes, and so what I would say to people, because again, like both of you are saying, it's really normal to feel a huge sense of guilt, or like, you know, I could have done more, and that you can go over and over that on storyboards and keep talking about it. But what I will say to people is, you need to be kind to yourselves. Okay, we need to be kind, because we don't know, nobody knows. We all know when we're born that we will die. But the uncertainty is we don't know when we're going to die. Okay, so we have to be kind to ourselves. You know, sometimes children will say, but I didn't say goodbye to my mum that morning, or I had an argument with her that morning and then she died. And that, you know, again, like we talked about, there's trauma attached to it, it's complicated, and it just needs time. It needs time and space, and it needs to be respected, that it's okay to feel those feelings. But hopefully by being kind to ourselves, we will learn that it was out of, you know, it was nothing to do with us, it was out of our control. And it can take time to accept, you know, because I think we feel that when we then accept that we have to let go, but we don't have to let go if we continue bonds in a healthy way with our loved ones that have died, or pets, animals.
Yeah.
And I think what you say, it's very important that mindfulness is very good, that sometimes we become overwhelmed with those feelings that just flow on, and it's about coming into center, to being mindful. This is today, this is my life, and I hopefully can go out and walk and look at trees. A lot of people are incarcerated at the moment, so that's difficult for them. Their one mechanism of going out into nature is probably very limited if you live in a city or a town, so they're going to have to find ways to release that. And I suppose if I had just a generalized client that wasn't particularly in grief, I would say them trying, you know, to look for good pictures of nature, to immerse themselves in something to look at that pulls them to center. Because these are the things we're having to deal with at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, it's really tough for people, but exactly what you just said, Josephine, there's so much research to say even looking at just a photograph of nature is enough to kind of reground you, reboost you. There's a technique that I quite like at the moment, and I sometimes get people to do it on my outdoor therapy walks, for earthing, where you actually take your shoes and socks off, put your feet in some soil on the grass. You know, it's a good way of rebalancing our bodies.
Yes, indeed. And there's some wonderful, at the moment, there's some wonderful soundscapes out there on the internet of the sea or the wind in the trees, and those sort of things can be really quite good to use, can't they, if you can't actually get out into the real thing.
There's some really good apps you can download, Headspace and Calm. Like you've just said, they have some wonderful, I think I might have said it when I was talking about going out and listening to the birds song, but if your mind is really chattery, the best sense to connect to is your hearing. it's the one that can center you the most quickly. If you try to focus on your breathing, people get really stressed and I can't do this, I've got all these thoughts. Whereas if you just focus on the sounds, so any sounds like you've just talked about, the sea or wind in the trees, the birds, is a good way of helping to ground yourselves. And putting 2 feet on the floor, that's one thing I say to my clients a lot. They often say, well, I've crossed my legs. I said, well, when you're feeling in that place, if you can center yourself with your 2 feet on the floor. And also, if you can, number one, name your grief, name the feeling, that can be really helpful. But see where it might be in your body. You know, I think I said at the beginning, people can very often feel it in our chest area here, in our tummies. And just doing simple exercises where you sort of close your eyes and breathe sort of a nice light or colour into that part of your body. If you're used to doing those things, it may just take a bit of time to get used to. But just sitting in, you know, in your comfortable chair at home and actually going, where do I feel this feeling? What is the feeling?
And this is your tree, isn't it, John? Somatic feelings within the body.
Yeah, I do a lot of that work. Yeah. I mean, I'm really intrigued with the outdoor therapy that you do.
Okay.
Because I mean, you know, it's quite in a kind of strange way. It's quite magical at the moment because when you go out for walks and stuff, the countryside is incredibly quiet. I mean, I tend to walk every day, or I cycle, and the cycling is there's no cars on the road really, so it's really quite magical. But I'm just wondering how do you do the outdoor therapy? Do you normally do it in groups, or do you do it individually, or how can you take us through what you do with it?
So I started it a couple of years ago. It was so I started with groups. I was very lucky to be championed by Thorncombe Woods, which is in Dorchester, which has got the most amazing woodland space. One of the rangers there, Claire Platten, I asked her whether I could try it, and she said, yes, please. I started with bereaved clients, but it quickly grew actually to be anybody experience any loss, a divorce or a separation, or people who are carers as well, and they feel they have a loss of identity when they suddenly become a carer 24 hours. So what we do is, and what I have been doing for 2 years, is meeting once a month with a specific group, and we follow the transitions of the woodland. And we do a lot of therapeutic creative interventions, including mindfulness. We just take time, we walk different paces. And the main thing is we get a lot of healing from the trees, actually. And we have a circle of beech trees where we all stand, and a lot of people have been able to release their feelings in nature. But the one thing that also happens is people find that playful spirit, the child spirit comes out, and it's for me as a therapist, it's making me go all tingly on the back of my head, because it's such a magical process, like you've said, to see these people turn up feeling overwhelmed, you know, so heavy with their grief, and to almost see them skip out of the woodland, you know, after 2 hours. And I always say to people, we are going into the portal of the forest when they first arrive, and we go into this portal, and the most amazing things happen for people. And then, but the wonderful part of it is they become friends, and they have this support network away from my work, and they all still keep in contact with each other. They go after the year process, they go for walks together. So yeah, the whole process is brilliant. But I do also one-to-one therapy as well. Sorry.
Right. No, you carry on, Em.
Yeah, I do one-to-one therapy as well, and that can be really helpful for people who find it really difficult to name feelings. You know, for some people, being in a therapeutic space can feel very claustrophobic, can make them feel more anxious. So actually just allowing them to walk alongside you and share their stories can be, for them, the better process for them.
And I was just going to say that going into the woodland and going out into nature is hugely shamanic and ancient, really, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know how old Thorncombe Woods is actually, but there's definitely some, it's a wonderful healing space, and I feel very lucky to go in there. I thank the woods every time I come out, and I tell them we're going to be there, and yeah.
That's ancient and instinctive in us, I think.
Yeah. But I think the thing about doing the outdoor groups, I mean, I've done Shinrin Yoko training in Dartmoor, which was amazing, and I don't know whether you know about Shinrin Yoko, but it comes from Japan. It's the Japanese forest bathing, and it was introduced in Japan in the 1980s when people were sitting at their computers a lot, were feeling very anxious and depressed. It started to be prescribed. They did a lot of research, measured people's cortisol levels, their blood pressure, and it was proven to reduce blood pressure, reduce stress, reduce anxiety, depression, and so basically a huge positive benefit for physical, mental and spiritual health. And so I've been introducing that a lot into my work.
Can you, I haven't heard of that. I mean, because that's quite interesting, particularly now, isn't it? When people are, I mean, I found this when you're spending the whole morning in front of a computer, which I don't normally do. What do they do? It's Shinrin Yoko.
So it's called Shinrin Yoko. It's forest bathing, and you just literally use the forest. Well, if you're lucky enough, I mean, I feel in grief at the moment because I'm unable to go to the forest because I can't get to the forest walking. So I am. I'm lucky that I have got some trees and green space to walk in, but it's about going into the forest and really absorbing all the microbiomes in the forest. If you can do that, just being in the forest for about 20 minutes, those positive microbiomes are really good for they start to be positive for your physical, your gut health even, which obviously, a lot of us store feelings in our tummies, and at the moment we might be feeling extra anxious, so our gut health might not be as good as it normally is. So just 20 minutes and being amongst the trees and everything in the forest is so good for you.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about something else, which is to do with obviously there's many different emotions that might come up when someone has died, and as you said, but for example, supposing someone was with a partner who was particularly difficult, maybe even abusive or whatever, and then so in a sense that when they actually pass away, there can be actually quite a lot of relief, and then there can be guilt around even feeling that, let alone expressing the fact that actually, this is a bit of a relief for me now, that I can kind of get on with the rest of my life. I mean, how do you deal with those, because those are very complex kind of emotions, and there's a lot of taboos around potentially around those kind of feelings.
I think, first of all, like you just said, it's incredibly complex grief. It's really, really tough for people if they've been in an abusive relationship. Sometimes people may not realize they've been in an abusive relationship till after someone's died, because it can be that complicated, especially if it's an emotional abuse. So I think it's just giving yourself time. Again, reaching out to professional support, and it's okay having the bereavement counselling. It may be long-term counselling that you need to have to help you through, but understand that all those feelings are normal. It's okay to feel relief. It's okay, but it's, the guilt's difficult, and also it's okay to still love the person. That very often people still have part of them that is in love with that abusive person as well. So it is extremely complicated to unpick. I talk about all grief, but complex grief, like lots of different colours of wool, and you just slowly, gently unpick each one. And so very, 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 very tough, and like you say, very complex. And being very kind to yourself.
And I also think that, if you've sat by the bedside of someone for, can be months, who have been terminally ill, there is also this feeling of almost huge relief as they go. And then you can end up feeling guilty about that as well. But you can only feel relief that they're free. And in a way, you're free from having to continually look at death, which is really difficult at times, isn't it? Just different complexities and layers of grief, really, isn't it? And
it's all the layers of grief. But I think you're very right, Josephine, in the fact that there is the relief, but what can come from that is a huge emptiness, because suddenly your routine was about going to the hospital and sitting at the hospice and going to the appointments, and suddenly you haven't got that anymore. And so a lot of the work I do with my outdoor groups and all my grief work is about how we then re-identify with who we now are, and that can be a whole new process as well.
Emma, one thing, could we talk a little bit about suicide? Would that be all right?
Yeah, we can do, yeah.
Because again, that's immensely complicated, isn't it?
Well, I think I said at the beginning, the most complicated griefs are, for people can be the very sudden deaths, and people who choose to die by suicide. Again, the feelings that come up for those loved ones left behind are similar, really, to what we've already talked about. Why didn't I not know that they? Very often people aren't aware that somebody has been feeling in that way. I think it takes a lot of acceptance for loved ones to see that if that's an adult making that choice, then that was their choice. And it takes time. Lots of creative work can be very helpful for any complicated grief, where you've sort of got a manageable boundary in front of you to allow the client to explore themselves in a creative way, whether that may be drawing the feelings. There are some really good helplines for people who are affected by a death of a loved one by suicide. So it may be, again, going to the specific signposting, but at Mosaic, we work with lots of families that have been affected by suicide. And I think talking to children in that way, that's really, again, up to a family, because we understand empathically that sometimes not all parents or families will want their younger children to know that full story. So we are respectful to the family's wishes at that time. Of how we would then work with the bereaved child. Yeah,
I mean, it was interesting because one of my family members took his own life when I was quite young, and the reaction then was not to talk about it, that actually pretend something else had happened. It was interesting, but with
okay, yeah. So you knew he died, but you didn't know how he died.
No, not initially,
yeah,
but obviously. I mean, kids tend to, I don't know, they often tend to take responsibility, don't they? For example, if parents divorce, sometimes children will think it's their fault, or that somehow that they are responsible. And similarly with suicide, I know that happens a lot, that somehow it's their fault that, daddy's gone or whatever. And I'm just wondering how, and that can be missed, I think, sometimes, can't it, with, parents don't necessarily appreciate that sometimes. I'm just wondering how you deal with that, because when you're dealing with families, there's very, very strong emotions, aren't there, from the person who's left behind and from the children. So I'm just wondering how I suppose the question is, how do you deal with those very, very strong feelings of responsibility and guilt, particularly with children?
For children. I think the reason, the charities like Mosaic, who I work for, Winston Wish and Child Bereavement UK, that they're specifically to allow the child to have a voice. So hopefully we are there for the family, but my role is to meet with the child on a one-to-one and allow them just to creatively work through that. So if they're feeling guilty, we might make, what does guilt look like? What does their guilt look like? And they might make it out of clay or Play-Doh, and it's lots of kind of being tangible with it. Let's move it. Well, is it as big as it was last time I saw you? And the more they are able to have the voice about the guilt, what would normally happen is that guilt will just sort of start to reduce. So I normally would see children maybe once a month. Again, with bereavement counselling, I don't tend to see people weekly, because I think there's so much to process. It's very difficult. So, the children will creatively make all their feelings, and we keep them. And then every month we relook at them. Is it still this feeling? Is it another feeling? And just, it's amazing just having that time and space for them to just explore how they're feeling. It is incredibly powerful for them, actually. And then they then, if depending on what age they are, we might then share that with their parents. If they give me permission, we might share it with their teachers. A lot about working with children is not just solely working with them, it's working with the whole team. So I will often work with other, maybe 5 or 6 other professionals, including schools, making sure that everybody's aware of the child's voice. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, you have done quite a bit of work in that area, haven't you, Emma? Going into schools. I want you to talk about your sparkles.
Oh, do you want me to? Okay. So yeah, I'm very lucky. I'll go into a lot of schools in Dorchester with bereaved, to support bereaved children. And I've talked about at the beginning, for some professionals, even now, the death word it really is difficult. They get very anxious, understandably, about how to work appropriately with the child, comfort the family. So that's where Mosaic come in. We go in as counsellors, but there's also amazing training that the rest of the team do. But about 5 years ago, I went through my own sort of tough transition, and sadly, one of the combination of bereavements really, but one of my really amazing tutors died. And I know this is hard, Josephine, perhaps for you to talk about because you knew her, but
she was the founder of Mosaic.
and she was the principal at the Iron Mill, which is where I did my training. And she died very
for years. We lost something remarkable.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring her into the room because I think it's a lovely moment to do that for her. But she died very suddenly, and we were all left really devastated as a student in the college. But her gift to us was a Christmas tree, and so we sort of turned up. We were told that she died, so we all felt very, very upset. But they said, you've been left a Christmas tree to decorate because it was near Christmas, and the Christmas tree sat there a bit like the elephant in the room for quite a while. And then we all sort of got up, we all gathered ourselves together and we're going to do this for Tricia. And we decorated the tree with these sparkly lights. And I sat back for a moment and thought, okay, everything feels quite overwhelming. But I looked at all the lights on the tree and I thought, right, but I'm going to challenge myself to re-find my sparkle. And I don't mean, I meant my inner sparkle, because when you're dealing with overwhelming feelings, your inner sparkle gets squished with all the layers of feelings. And since I've learned that term is called Ziji, it's a Buddhism, to sparkle from within, to glitter from within. So the work I do, I have a Facebook page, which is called, I set up, as soon as I'd had that thought, I set this page up. And the idea was when I was in nature, because that's when I seemed to get my Ziji, whatever that might be, the sun coming through the clouds, I would say that's my sparkle for today. And now I go into schools with I've got them here, my bucket of sparkles, and I talk to children about if they're having tough times, how can they find their inner sparkle? And a lot of it is around self-care. They share their hobbies or their dreams, or they write, yeah, so I run self-care sparkle sessions in different schools, and they're working really positively. It's almost a very gentle introduction to mental health for children, and I focus on that sort of year 3, year 4 age group, where they start to feel the feelings and they start to feel shameful for actually feeling them. So it's I feel that's a really good age to sort of intervene.
Beautiful.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, but adults like them as well. And if I could virtually throw them to you, I would throw you. Oh. But in a serious way, if I'm going to empty them out actually, but if you are an adult who is in a really tough grief situation, your bucket is going to be really empty, and it is really finding that part of you that is responsible to your grief, take responsibility for it, and how do you fill up your bucket to help you through each hour, each day, each day, because part of grief is just to take it day by day. You may suddenly think, oh, like I've had a brilliant few weeks, and then you may then suddenly just feel back in that yoke again, and that's okay. It's a process, and you might go 2 steps back, 10 steps forward, but it is just about keeping yourself balanced and really looking after your self-care and being kind.
I think that's really beautiful, Emma. I always know you and your sparkles, but it's
me and my sparkles. Yeah, I have a lot around the house, but but finding something to comfort yourself, whether that might be a little pebble or something that you can just keep with you. Maybe your loved one, had a little pebble or something, or just something you can hold on to. It again, part of our grief is to pass on those legacies, isn't it, to our loved ones. About I've got my grandma here now, and my children never met her, so part of my responsibility is to share that with them, and the things that she liked to do, and her little sayings. We all have our legacies, don't we? Well, hopefully.
Stories, our family stories.
Our family stories, that's right.
Which are always very important, aren't they? Then, and they've gone, those people, and in a way, you keep their stories going, and that's good for the children. Their connection to all that their family has ever been, and knowing that although they're gone, there's still a part of them, and their habits and their behaviours are still with you. Mm-hmm. Yes. Beautiful, Emma. I think you've done a wonderful job this evening.
Well, thank you. My aim is just to really hopefully bring some comfort to people. I think it's really okay. We've just been smiling. It's okay to bring humour as part of that balance. I know a lot of the doctors at the moment and the nurses will be using a lot of humour to help them through this really tough time.
Yes, very, very difficult for the staff witnessing quite such a volume of death at once. Really hard for them. They'll need a lot of self-love when they've got the energy to find it at the end of it all. Are there more questions you wanted to ask, Emma, John?
No, I think that's beautiful. I really like the sparkle. I mean,
the sparkle.
That's a nice
I would say to people, if you're, I will send you some. Another thing is that however close the family is, when somebody dies, it can really change the dynamics in the family. That's really normal. We all grieve. Grief is a unique process for everybody. If you've got 5 or 4 people in a family, you're all going to grieve at different times. And sometimes with young children, they'll play out a behaviour which is sharing the grief of the whole family. So a child might start throwing things, or maybe getting a bit shouty, and they very often are sharing the anger of the whole family that somebody has died. I think that's very interesting, that work. And also, if you're unable to sadly go to a loved one's funeral over this time, then there may be ways that you can do a video link to the funeral if families are doing that. You might want to share a poem and send it to the family. They could read out for you. And if you're unable to do any of those things, then you can do your own rituals in your home. Light a candle, look at some photographs, play some music, and maybe going forward you'll have time to go to the special resting place. Quite a lot of my work can be about where maybe people haven't been involved in funerals. It's amazing how much negative energy comes out when somebody's died, and people may feel like they've not been able to attend funerals for different reasons, and so we do talk about, you can make your own rituals. It's okay, remembering that all of this is out of our control. So you can be in control of some of it, whatever it might be. You might want to name a tree. You have a walk and there's a tree that you love, and you might want to name that the person. So you say hello to them, hi Dad, every morning, or whatever it might be. So I think it's important to find your own control in these out of control situations.
And Emma, do you want to talk a little bit about, or just tell us about, you've got some virtual self-care groups on Facebook?
Yeah, well, that's been a real challenge, because obviously I have been enjoying my outdoor groups with some amazing people. I call my groups stomp groups, because it's about stomping back to yourself when you feel very out of control. And so I have these amazing group of stompers, and so I set up, I'm very technically challenged. So I've set up some virtual stomp groups, and we meet Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays in the early evening, and I bring virtual walks into their home, very relaxing sessions, or we channel energies of trees. So for example, oak trees, there's a lot of strength in an oak tree, so we might talk about how we can channel strength. So I've been doing those for the last 2 weeks, and it's been just lovely to carry on the connection for people, because I think that's really important right now.
Yeah. How will people find those sort of things? By going on you need to mention where you are on a website on Dorchester Counselling.
Yes, so my website is Dorchester Counselling and Wellbeing, but I have a Facebook page which is Self-Care Sparkles, and I have a group called Self-Care Stomp Group that people can join, and I've just set up a Sparkles family group for any families who are feeling all these feelings we've talked about, perhaps don't want to share, maybe feel a bit embarrassed about it. Please don't be, please just share it, and we're all in it together right now. So and some families that I've spoken to last week have shared some really good coping strategies with other families, so it's been a really positive process.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emma.
No, thank you so much. Thank you to both of you for just letting me sort of talk about what I do, and hopefully it's helpful to people. People can contact me at any, if they just want to email me after this and with any questions, that's absolutely fine. But I would like to say a huge thank you to, like I said at the beginning, to all my tutors, all my supervisors, everybody at Mosaic and Cruise, the most amazing, wise people who we continually evolve with our job and learn every day. And mainly thank you to my clients, because from them I learn so much, and it's always a privilege to meet with all their loved ones. When we do my groups, I do a Christmas one, and it's to remember a loved one, and we always end up with, if we start with 10 people in the group and everyone shares their special people, we end up with 20 people, and yeah, it's very special. So I feel very lucky in my job. It's a great place to be.
Thank you so much, Emma, for sharing your expertise with us tonight. I knew you were the person to ask, and you giving your all tonight. So thank you. I want to say thank you to you. I'm sure John does too. And before we end, John, I need to talk about Will Parfit in 2 weeks' time. So you've got something to say.
No. I was just to end really. It was about touch, because I'm a touch therapist. I do craniosacral work and things like that, and touch is so important in this. In bereavement, isn't it? Like comforting touch, and different people have very different attitudes to touch, and whether they're comfortable with touch or not. And of course now we can't really touch people, can we? Or we can touch people that in our family that we live with, but that's quite a big thing, isn't it? That not being able to touch, I guess.
I think pardon me, my phone alarm's going off, so sorry about that. Yeah, I think it is very difficult time for people. We're all missing those hugs. So what I say to people sometimes, if they're on their own, is if you can get a really big blanket, wrap a blanket around yourself, you can think about the person that you are wishing to hug, send positive energy. You can kind of do a hug like that, send it to them. And again, I think it's just to share that feeling with people as well, isn't it? Being honest, I'm really missing giving you that hug. I wish I could be there to comfort you. But I can't, we can't be there at the moment. So a written word, I think, is also a lovely way of being there for somebody. But just to share that, John, I'm really missing that I can't do that, be there for you.
Yeah. Very beautiful. Thank you.
I think what you're saying is probably touching everybody, because I think that's something that everybody's missing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks. So Jesse, you got something to say about the will?
Yes, I do. I want to talk about the next person. I think we'll probably end on that trilogy with Will coming in a couple of weeks' time, and probably move to moving beyond what we're all experiencing at the moment. But I'm not sure what format that will take, so I shall have to wait for the inspiration to come. So on Monday, the 20th of April, this time at 9 a.m. in the morning, John and I are going to be talking to Will Parfitt. Particularly, we're going to be discussing the content of one of Will's book, The Something and Nothing of Death. I think you can possibly see that. John, can you see it? Yes?
I can see it.
See it. Now, a lot of people will know Will Parfitt. He's quite a well-known gentleman. Will Parfitt is a psychosynthesis psychotherapist, and he is also a tutor of psychosynthesis, the Kabbalah. He's got students all around the world. He's written countless books, informative, tuitional books on psychosynthesis and the Kabbalah. And the book I've just mentioned, The Something and Nothing of Death, is a beautiful book. I bought it years ago. I think he published it. It was published in 2008. It's full of immense wisdom and philosophy and reflective exercises. And its aim is to help us become more comfortable to talk and consider our own eventual deaths throughout the course of our lives. A quote from the front cover states, a book to read before you die. I can't recommend it more. It's the most wonderful, comforting book to read. And as Will states, death is present through life. And the more we face this, the more death becomes a wise advisor, encouraging us to live more fully. To make a relationship with death is to commit to self-evolution and growth, and to overcome unnecessary fear. So look forward very much to speaking with Will Parfitt on Monday, 20th of April at 9 a.m. So I'm going to say goodbye now, and I hope some of you will join us again to hear what Will has to say. And in the next couple of weeks, I shall put more up about that talk. So goodbye from me tonight. Goodbye. Thank you, Emma. And thank you, John, for being the great tech man at the other end, of which I'm terrified.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.